to get it. I want to end on a positive note because the movie I'm about to talk about is so dire and so prescient
Yeah.
that it could depress the hell out of y'all and myself and anyone watching. You've been warned,
Then let's
audience.
not end on that one.
So, I mean, I personally love it. I can watch it over and over because it's like a very involving documentary, which exactly what it's not shot like a documentary, but it is shot in a way that it's almost like a documentary with recreations and actors instead of footage. So, but all the stuff like printouts and statistics, there's lots of statistics, maps, and they bring that up to frame the dramatic sequences. And basically, this came out in 1984, and director was Mick Jackson, and it was written by a guy named Barry Hines, and it was a BBC production, believe it or not. And the reason they got co-production with Australia. The reason they did it is because in 1967, Peter Watkins made The War Game, and The War Game was a quasi-documentary, and it's like up to a nuclear war and the after effects. I have a copy of it. I've watched it once. I don't remember well. It's really beautifully shot. I think it's black and white, and
Yes, it
that was
is.
it was a very infamous movie because no one would show it in Britain. It
Yeah.
was made, and then the BBC's like, we can't show this. They were afraid people were literally going to kill themselves. Sorry, YouTube. People are really going to kill themselves watching this
Peter Watkins
movie.
made some brilliant
Very
films.
necessary.
Like
Punishment
Park and The
Yeah.
Gladiators.
Yeah, he was great. But yeah, the War Game became infamous, and they decided they were going to, not remake it. They were going to make their own story, but it was going to have the same basic thing, which is going to be a cautionary against nuclear war.
Mhm.
And so basically it starts out with these two families, and it's like Romeo and Juliet, the daughter and the son. They get together. I'm trying to remember their names. Oh, Ruth Beckett and Jimmy Kemp. So she gets pregnant, and they talk about it, and it's pretty realistic. I mean, they're really good actors, and it's very naturalistic. And she decides she's going to keep it, and they're going to get married. And this is in Sheffield, in the United Kingdom, and they're like, yeah, we'll do this. And the family's like, are you cool with this? The family doesn't really pressure them in any particular way. They're kind of glad they're getting married, regardless of the baby. So they're just kind of hanging out. And then as their story's unfolding, we're intermittently told by the omniscient narrator and omnipresent narrator that there's, with all these statistics and maps showing what's happening in the world, the wider world. And he wanted to bring it down to the street level and show how it affected humans. He didn't want to. He said clearly, because also the audio documentary, they said, we don't want to make a movie about presidents or scientists or businessmen or anything remotely like that. We want to make a movie about working class people and how their lives are completely annihilated because of the people I just mentioned. And so Russia invades Iran, and that's a little far-fetched, I think, but maybe it wasn't back then. I don't know the dynamics of Russia and Iran in the 80s. Nowadays, I couldn't see
Well,
that happen.
they did invade Afghanistan, so it's not
Well,
too
I
far
could see
off.
Russia. I could see Russia becoming an ally of our. Well, they are. That already happened. That happened like a couple months ago. They're in a coalition, which I know some people call an axis of evil. The rest of us call it the path to a multipolar future, where hegemony ends, American hegemony ends, and we're all going to go through a hard time with the economy. But we come out the other side, things are going to be different. They're definitely going to be different in America, and no one wants to hear any of this. So I'll try to be as I'll try not to be controversial as much as possible. But this movie is so prescient, it's impossible not to. And because, like I said, some of this is happening now. Like the pressure comes when the invasion happens, the pressure comes from NATO. Now, NATO is the one who started a certain war that's going on right now in our world, and in real life, IRL. And on the other side is the Warsaw Pact. So those countries, which would include Ukraine, and Crimea, though, is a little different geographically in the 60s, in the 80s than it is now. But if anyone looks at a map of Russia and Ukraine, it's very obvious what's going on. I mean, they were one country and they were one people, and they just fractured. And when they fractured, the people who had more ethnic traits like Mongol or Jewish ancestors when the Nazis took over, they started doing the old final solution on them. And they did it for 8 years. And the reason they had money and power to do it is because of Mr. Obama and Mr. Biden. So they did all this, and it led to what's happening now. So, then everybody debates over why Russia did it. One reason they did it is because they were trying to liberate the ethnic Russians. Two, they hated Nazis. Now, the other things that they're accused of doing it for, I'm going to leave those to other people. Whether Putin wants to conquer the world, I don't personally believe any of that, but I could see him being like keeping this war going and destroying people, but I don't think he will. I think if we get killed, all of us, it's going to be America that launches the first missile.
Probably.
Or they're going to put him in an impossible situation where he will. And that's what they're trying to do now, and I don't know why I have tons of theories about that too. I mean, we're talking about very psychopathic people.
Yeah.
And they're building rockets to leave the Earth. They're buying up land. They're doing all this weird shit, and we don't know about it. And we're like,
West for president.
And they're and less and less they're less. Yeah, hopefully, and less we're finding out about it, because now it's getting to where they don't care if we know. They're like, what can you do, peasant? So it's like you're going, wow. So all these like conspiracy theories really happen. So in this movie, Russia does invade Iran, and so NATO goes crazy, and then the Warsaw Pact comes in, and instead of what's happening in Iraq now, where the Warsaw Pact countries are being sucked into NATO, and that's making Russia angry, they go against NATO. They kind of back Russia. So you've got like all these, nations like whatever, Lithuania and Ukraine, and I don't remember all of them, and not at the moment. And so I do remember that map though of Ukraine and Russia. And yeah, so then America's like, no, you can't do this, Russia. And Russia doesn't do any aggression. They just say, no, we're not going to leave Iran. We're going to keep this, we're doing what we're doing, conquering it. And so Russia U.S. launches regular bombers, and they bomb on some of the Russian forces. And so the Russians start launching missiles. And once they start launching, they launch one missile, and then they stop. It's like a warning salvo. So it causes some damage to some major cities in America and Europe. But it doesn't, it's not lethal to everybody. It doesn't cause electromagnetic pulse or anything. So a day or two go by, and the president starts talking smack, and then Russia launches all of them. And they actually launched 3 near Sheffield and this is all true, which I didn't know. I looked on Wikipedia, and I mean, this is all reflecting how it was at that moment in real life. So Sheffield has stations of stations of military, a strategic area, military strategy area, beachhead, you could say. And there's weapons there and forces. And then there's a couple of stations. I can't remember if they're military or they're science, but they're American. I mean, they're English with some American help, but they're near Sheffield too. So there's like 3 places in the general area where they fire the smaller missiles. So that could destroy Sheffield, and of course, and most of the people in it. So then, I think they said 30 million people died within a few days, and some instantly. So they show this family and how they cope with this. Basically, they go and live in the basement, but they can't agree on what to do. So Jimmy, the father of the unborn baby, he dies as soon as the strike hits, and she wants to go look for him, and she's in shell shock. So she becomes one of those characters that's inconsolable for the whole movie, like Barbara in Night of the Living Dead. They're in shock. They're no help to anybody. What can you do with them? But you're trying to keep them alive. Hey, come over here, Barbara.
Yeah.
There's a zombie. Oh. And that's how she is. They're like, Ruth. And she's like, so that would be probably very realistic. But that would probably be me. So
yeah. I either go into like ADHD crisis management mode and be remarkably competent, or I would fall apart. There's no in between.
Yeah, that's how I am. A lot of it depends on my meds, but when that happens, there's probably no amino meds anymore. And Ruth isn't. I can't say she's an interesting character, but what's interesting is they choose to follow her. They don't solely follow her. I mean, they spend time with the emergency forces in the area, and they are underground now. They were prepared as best as they could for this. So it's like a bunch of British guys, and they're all pretty fairly likable guys. I mean, they're actually trying to restore order, and it's impossible. And so they start sending out, policemen and military to restore order. And of course, the policemen will do anything it takes to do what they're going to do. So, they start shooting some people, and some people start freaking out. People that live behind these gates because there's not enough food. They have to food ration everything and supply ration. So the people in the underground bunker, they run out of food in a few. I mean, they're there like weeks, and they eventually just start dying. And so that whole segment goes through like what are the effects, and the biggest effect in the outer world that causes them to suffer, besides the explosion that blew up most of their buildings, is the electromagnetic pulse. So they have no electricity whatsoever. They have no car batteries. They have nothing. They eventually find some old school little batteries that work, and they were able to do a few things, but no internet. No, there was no internet. And so it's pretty bleak.
The military had the internet back in those days.
Well, even the military doesn't have much. They're basically roaming the countryside, trying to restore order or get people to take the food rations. That's kind of, and basically one of the biggest mandates is they force people to live in people's houses. Like, say there's an old man who owns a house, and they force him to take in Ruth and 5 other people. I think it's her family or her friend.
Third Amendment.
And then he's like, I don't want these people in my home. And so they go in there and they go in the basement, and this guy's like, yeah, fuck this. And then they decide to leave, which is really a stupid idea. And because Ruth is just like a wandering. I think she thinks Jimmy's alive. Obviously she knows he isn't alive, but it's that, like Barbara. I think my brother's alive. Well, he's undead, but good try. And Ruth just kind of slopes off. And then she kind of goes out on her own, foraging for stuff. She meets one of Jimmy's friends. They kill an animal. I forgot what kind of animal. It's not a cow. It's a sheep, I'm pretty sure. And it's fairly graphic. It's not super graphic. I don't think they really killed that sheep. Now, the post-apocalyptic movie I watched yesterday, rewatched, called Late August at the Hotel Ozone, and that when they butcher a cow, it's real. It's all women. There's the cast. They do find an old man, but it's like 8 women who survived the nuclear war 15 years on, and they're just roaming. They're losing their education. They don't have any. They're unfamiliar. The oldest one, she's like an older woman. She's like the only one who really remembers the old past. And one thing they do is when they finally come near this old guy's farm, they don't really care about the farm. The first thing they want is the cow, and the one girl shoots the cow, and 3 of the other women are like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And she's like, bang. And they're fairly ruthless. They're except for the leader, and then the next woman who's 30. All of the younger ones, the 6 younger ones, are all feral, pretty much. One is learning how to read when they find books, and she is able to read. I mean, she sounds like she's having a really, really, really hard time with it, though. I don't know if she's comprehending what she's reading. But yeah, they butcher a cow, and the actors actually butcher the cow, like in Cannibal Holocaust. I was kind of surprised I didn't remember that scene, and it's very drawn out.
Well, that's like City of Living Dead. They killed a real sheep, and they made the girl chew up the guts to spit them out.
But that's off camera, though. I mean, this is the camera goes right past the girls and focuses in on the gaping maw and gore of the inside of the cow. Yeah. And it's not as gross as the Cannibal Holocaust scene. But I wonder if this is a Czechoslovakian movie. I wonder if these Czech girls had the same off-camera feeling that the guys did in Cannibal Holocaust, because 2 of the people, the blonde guy and Francesca, I forgot her last name for some reason, the one who played the main character's girlfriend, she and the other guy have stated, it was really gross. And he asked them to eat little pieces of the turtle. And then the other people haven't really commented. But this was They were really, and they look disgusted. There's a couple of shots in Cannibal Holocaust where one of the guys really, he looks disgusted, and they kept it in, you know. He's one of the most ruthless guys, and I think that was maybe how even the ruthless guys would be. They're like, yeah, I got this turtle, and oh, I'm eating a turtle.
Get a little more dimension to the characters.
But see, we are desensitized to that by the beef industry. So for these women with echoes of the beef industry, they probably are like, cows are just food. I'm not really killing a sentient being. So when they dig into the guts, they have no emotion about it, except a couple of them do. But most of them are just like, yeah, let's get some meat. No thought of how they're going to cook it. Mm-hmm. And they find canned food in that movie, and the cans are all fucked up. They can't open it, or it's molded. But anyway, Threads is a much better movie. So she forages, she finds a friend of Jimmy, and they eat a sheep. And then she goes into labor by herself in an alleyway. I don't know where she is. She's still in Sheffield, but that's messed up. And she keeps her kid, and then they go 13 years later. He starts talking about what all happened in the interim. He talks about how it affected the crops, the atmosphere, the environment. What kind of, is there any order whatsoever?
Pretty crazy if she eats her kid.
No, that doesn't happen. But what happens to the kid is pretty horrific anyway. But no, the kid grows up. The kid's 13 or whatever.
I thought you said she eats her kid.
No, she has the kid. No, she has the kid. She ate a sheep. She ate a sheep. Then she had her kid. Don't get them mixed up. She had a sheep and ate her kid.
Or did she have a cow?
She had a cow. Literally and figuratively.
There is a passage in Two Kings where they eat a woman's kid.
Well, I'll get to the horrific part. Don't worry, it's horrific. It's not. It doesn't involve cannibalism, but other social horrible taboos. But so 13 years later, her daughter, I'm blanking on her name, is with her, and they forage together. And Ruth has aged immensely. Now, mine has only been 13 years, and she was like in her early 20s. She looks about 65. I mean, she's literally aged into a crone in 13 years of just foraging and being like a feral human who used to be a non-feral human, a domesticated human. And her daughter has to kind of like help her with stuff. And what has happened with that generation that was born is they have minimal education. And so some of the older people try to find battery-operated things they could use, some of which, I mean, they've spent 13 years looking. They finally find some, that were used in schools in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So they're teaching them. So the kids they're learning all these words. I don't think they know what they mean at all, And so she falls in with two guys in a gang, if you want to call that a gang. And, they go foraging together, and Ruth dies. And the kid is like, Ruth, wake up, work. See, their speech, I mean, they say like sentences that have like 3 or 4 words that they've remembered. And like one of them is never in context. So they really don't form, I mean, they get their meaning across, but they don't form coherent sentences with all of the, adjective, verb, adverb, all that stuff. That's all gone. So, she's alone and she hangs out with these boys, and they get too close to this place where these horses, and I don't want to eat them, don't worry. And I guess they want to ride them or whatever, or just maybe pet them. And they start running away, and one of the guys shoots him, so he dies. So the other guy starts freaking out. They go into the alleyway and they start arguing, though, of course, in stilted, weird language. And then he gets on top of her because she grabs something he wants. And then he ends up raping her. And so then you see her a little bit later, well, I guess 9 months later, and she is pregnant. And she's still alone, but she's got some older people and some of the educators and stuff. But it's mostly still just a bunch of feral children. And so one lady helps her give birth in this kind of makeshift triage, and it's a mutant, and you don't see its face. I mean, first of all, it's really small, and it's totally covered with blood. I mean, way more blood than it should be. I mean, the blood is seeping through the wrap of him. It's not like coming out of her. And so I don't know if he's bleeding or what. And I think he's just kind of viscous and oozy. And so you sort of see the side where the lady says, Ruth, do you want to see him? She's like, okay. I mean, not Ruth, her daughter. And she's like, okay. And then you see that he's kind of like weird red, like gory red. And that's all you see. And then it freezes and she starts to scream and then it freezes. You don't actually hear the scream. You hear it in your mind, but
Yeah.
I realize it doesn't exist. And that's it's the end. And it's incredible. And it's incredible because everyone should learn from it. And, nobody did. And, so a couple of the political channels that I follow, especially one called Hardlands Media, Kit Cabello, I've talked to him a few times. Kit actually talks about Threads a lot on the channel right now. And that was cool. That was just a coincidence because I was already into it. And he was like, you guys need to see Threads, man. This is happening now. Wake up. And he's letting his hair grow like really long as time is going by. And he's just like ranting every day. I mean, he gives really good news, but he's angry. He's like Howard Beale level now, man, mad as hell, and I can't take it anymore. So after that cheery film, I'm going to talk about an even more upbeat film, but different. After a nuclear war, most of the population gets sterilized, but that's not a new idea. But not only do they get sterilized, they lose their sex urge completely. Their libido is destroyed. I don't know if it's a neurological thing, a psychological thing caused by other brain damage, but it is caused by the Holocaust, the apocalypse. So this is Cafe Flesh, 1980. It might be 1982 also. I think it's earlier than Threads, but not a lot. 1983, I think. So this is a pornographic film. This is a triple X movie. There's no doubt about it. But I would even though it was made under those circumstances, it was not intended to be that kind of movie by the director. Even though he did start out in porn, he wanted to bridge like softcore into experimental and horror films, which several directors have started. Like Abel Ferrara started that way, Bill Lustig started that way. Exactly. So a lot of times the porn producers who were, and sometimes affiliated with the mob, let's be honest, some of them went on to produce exploitation movies. Bryanston is a great example. They were doing pornos, and then they did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and boom, when you make movies and grind them out like that cheap and cynical, if one hits because of the amount you put into it versus the profit, you become instantly wealthy. That's been all through history, like Blair Witch Project, John Carpenter with Halloween. So, what was I talking about? Stephen Sayadian, he's the director, aka Rent's Dream. That was his porno director name. He did a movie called Night Dreams, which was a porno, but it was a little more classy. I haven't seen it. I've just read about it. From what I understand, it's a little more classy, interesting art direction, more character development, and less sex. So he teams up with this writer who was up and coming and later became a fairly famous writer named Jerry Stahl. Jerry Stahl ended up writing a book called Permanent Midnight, which was his memoirs about being a heroin addict, among other things. Now, that became a huge bestseller. He became a notable writer. He started writing screenplays. He started writing for television. I actually wrote some of them down because they're so weird. He came out of this milieu and did these shows. Let me see if I find it. And it's not too much of a stretch here. Cafe Flesh, more notes. Okay, I'm getting into my 2019 and Hell Comes to Frogtown notes. So Jerry Stahl, he wrote this under the name Herbert W. Day, because he was Jerry Stahl, and Stephen Sayadian collaborated with him. So they had porno production money in place, and they're like, but I want to do this movie. I want a dystopian science fiction movie. So sex is the engine of the plot. So you get that out of the way. It's not a matter of, it's a real movie with characters and there's sex. So no, sex is actually the engine of the plot, like human sexuality, human reproduction. Though they don't get into the reproduction too much. But the world is divided into sex positives and sex negatives from a sociological view. And the sex negatives are like 95% of all humanity. So the sex positives are like 5% or less. And they're strewn, of course, all over the world. Well, in this one city, unnamed city, it's probably like Los Angeles. It's America, but they don't say what city. After all this, they've rebuilt the cities. And this woman named Moms, who was a former porn star, I guess before the Holocaust, maybe, because she looks like 55, which was rougher back then than 55 is now. But she runs this place called Cafe Flesh, and they basically find sex positive people who can have sex, and they start participating in sex acts that's like performance art with this very wild production design. And they have this MC, and it's all like super satirical. And they're basically like, he's like MCing, and each skit, usually he'll dress as an old film, dress as or act like a classic film character. Like he does Marlon Brando in one from whatever that movie was, Streetcar Named Desire, and one of them he does Bela Lugosi as Dracula. Some he just does it himself, but it's got and Andy Nichols plays him, and he's called Max Melodramatic, and he's very melodramatic, and he's kind of drives the energy of the movie, and he hosts all of the sex tableau, and so the sex positive people in that city they have nothing to do, and they're frustrated. You know, they have food. I mean, they have a sort of society now, but they can't have sex. So what fills that vacancy? So they're going to vicariously live through Cafe Flesh. So Cafe Flesh becomes super successful financially. And so the same people come there every night. It's like coming to your favorite bar. And they're driving themselves crazy, but it's like all they can do. And so it has a couple, and there's Lana and Nick. So Lana is notable. She's played by Michelle Bauer, who went on to do a ton of really, really low budget horror movies and trauma-like stuff. And was very popular in that scene. I think she's still alive. I think she still does conventions. She did this movie under the name Pia Snow, which I found out many years before I saw. I knew Pia Snow was Michelle Bauer many years before I saw this movie. But secretly, she's a sex positive. So there's scenes where she tries to get Nick to make love with her, and they start kind of kissing, and he starts feeling ill. And so, I mean, that's happened to everybody in their life. But he can't do it. So she finally is egged on by the people who find out that she's sex positive. And Moms is one of them, and the MC is one of them. So you're framing kind of characters who keep things going. And so some of them are gentle with her, and some of them are like, come on, like peer pressure. You got to do this. You can't be in this building and be sex positive and not participate, be part of it. So towards the end of the movie, there's some really nice sex scenes. I mean, mainly because they're very natural. They're totally different than any porn nowadays. I mean, they are definitely like 70s porn, but because they're having sex within the framework of having to have these costumes and sets, it's pretty much they're just doing the basic acts, and it's not like vulgar. It's really what anybody would do, in their bedroom, when they're starting out. It's not no kink. It's no nothing to that, and no fetishes. But their fetish kind of is they dress this way. And there's a guy who's dressed as a rat, and some critics of the movie claim that he's dressed up as a rat because of the show, and some people say he's a mutant. And I personally think he's a mutant because the tail starts moving around, and the way the tail moves around, I'm like, how could he move that tail with special effects and have sex like this? But that's up to interpretation. So finally, near the end, she gets toward the stage, and it's incredible. This really droning, tangerine dream-like music comes over everything. So like 3 solid minutes, it's all slow motion, and she's like walking towards, maybe 2 solid minutes, and that music, and it's incredible. And then she finally goes on stage. She has sex. Now I've read it was a body double, so she didn't actually have sex with this guy, but this guy was Johnny Rico, and he's like this famous guy who comes around to these kind of places, and he's kind of like the only real porn star of the future. They talk about him the whole movie. So when you finally meet him, he's stoic. He doesn't say anything. He's really, he's very muscular, but not like Schwarzenegger. He's not that good looking, and he just does his job. He just sex with her. So the ending is kind of, I'm gonna say it because the movie is anticlimactic, and that's on purpose. And it ends with a frame on her face, and you really can't tell how she feels about all this, because she seems to start enjoying the sex. She probably does, but she's like kind of confused, I guess. So it's ambiguous. So I really liked that about it. And I think it kind of is it's the kind of movie that evolved or was made around the same time as Liquid Sky. And where you have some of the same tropes in Liquid Sky, except it's a New York art scene. And then there's, there's some sex and there's aliens. Have you seen Liquid Sky yet? Either of you?
I haven't.
You seen it, Kaelyn?
No.
You'll love it. It's incredible. It's very, it's incredible.
No.
It's iconic. But
This one's making me think about Droid, which is like one of the worst movies I've ever seen, but which was
movie?
cut down from a porn. Droid, which was cut down from a porno called Cabaret Sin.
Oh, okay. I've heard that scenario, but I don't know anything else about it. There's a lot of interesting nuggets back then. Some are good, some are bad, some are mediocre. Most are mediocre to terrible. But I appreciate that they tried back then to have some healthy sexual acts depicted and have some creativity with the storylines and respect to the actors, especially the women. I mean, so I'm like, Devil in Miss Jones is literally one of my very favorite movies. I guess in my top 100, which makes it one of my very favorites because I have so many. So I like the golden age of porn, and to be honest, I rarely get aroused by it. I mean, sometimes, but it's unusual. When I first started watching it, I did, but now I'm kind of like, I just watch it for the story, the special effects, which they also do a lot of weird shit in those movies. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But anyway, so that's Cafe Flesh.
Talking about nuclear war. Talking about nuclear war. It's a motherfucker, don't you know? It's a motherfucker, don't you know? If they push that button, your ass gotta go. It's a motherfucker, don't you know? If they push that button, your ass gotta go. They're talking about nuclear war. They're talking about nuclear war. It's a motherfucker, don't you know? It's a motherfucker, don't you know? If they push that button, your ass gotta go.